This is Too Light, Too Dark, and this is the year under review. My co-host today is the author of The Broken Stone Chronicle, books that show that even fractured lives gain meaning through story. In reviewing 2025, a storyteller matters because they turn chaos into clarity, helping us sit with the too light of life and the too dark. Without that perspective, extreme moments risk being lost or misunderstood. So, with these words as flowers of introduction, I'm delighted to welcome Damien Black.
Thank you, Leon. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
So beforehand, we chopped it up a little bit and looked at the prior episodes and ones that have moved the dial in terms of listens, downloads, streams amongst our core audience. And I suppose the one that's done the most damage in terms of numbers is episode 3 and learning to sit in the dark. And for me, sitting in the dark can be grounding, but as you pointed out, it can also be a hiding place. And I wonder, when does emotional resilience quietly turn into avoidance, in your opinion?
Yeah, that is a poser, isn't it? Because I think the line is pretty blurred. I mean, as the whole metaphor dark would suggest. The dark is obviously the podcasts that you reference. It was Dr. Grelier, I believe. You know, he spoke about not getting lost in the dark and trying to find the answers in the dark, by which I took him to mean sort of don't be afraid to go into those dark corners of your psyche and have a rummage around. I know it's cold, I know it's scary, but don't flinch away from that. The problem with that, as I see it, is yeah, it can turn into an avoidance tactic. Like, you know, I'm someone that struggled for a number of years with, I think, pretty severe depression. um you know, there was a lot of talk about befriending depression, but then it can become a bit of a toxic relationship in itself. You kind of hide away in that. You start avoiding people, you avoid family, avoid friends, you can avoid relationships of any kind. And that there is a danger in that you begin to identify with that. And I would actually take a physical metaphor, like, you know, okay, you sit in the dark, you switch the lights off. At first, it's a bit creepy, it's a bit scary. I'm not going to sleep. Why am I sitting in a dark room? And I've done this a few times. And then you get used to it and you're like, oh, okay, actually, I'm actually quite cool with this. So, yeah, Dr. Grelier is right. You know, that you do need to be intrepid, I suppose. But what if then you get used to it? I mean, no one would say, sit in a dark room forever, right? That would be solitary confinement. It's the worst thing you can do to a human being, and it's maybe therefore not such a good thing you can do to yourself. So I think you have to be very careful, because I started to make an identity for myself out of being depressed. It was like a, you know, Stockholm syndrome, where you fall in love with your captor. It's like I'd almost become my own jailer. And it's like, Damien, I'm not letting you out of that dark room. You're going to stay there, because this is who you are. You are the person lost in darkness and now seeking in darkness and remaining in darkness. And I think there has to, it's not that I disagree with what you said per se. I mean, I broadly agree with it, but there has to come a point where you say, okay, I'm going to turn the light back on. I'm going to unlock that door, and I'm going to tell the jailer inside me, what I guess Freud might have called the superego. Okay, now you need to step aside, and you need to let me back out. And I think we need to be careful of that. But I also caveat that as someone who, you know, you introduced me as an author, and I guess a tag that's often associated with me, if we're being reductive, is dark fantasy author. And I love the dark. I'm seduced by the dark. The word sends shivers down my crooked spine. I use it. I have to stop myself overusing it in my prose. Dark, darkling, darkened. I mean, I love the dark. This is what I'm saying. You know, and you touch on addiction a lot, and I know that's a major component of a lot of themes of the show, Too Light, Too Dark. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that I am, to some degree, and maybe you'll relate to this, addicted to the dark. And I need to manage that. I need to be careful of that. So Too Light, Too Dark, I need to have a healthy balance between the two. But I do broadly agree with him. Yeah, we mustn't be completely afraid of it. Just don't get too comfortable in there.
And it's strange because you're right. If you do sit in the dark for long enough, your eyes acclimatize, so your rational brain takes over from the,
Right.
the imaginary fantasy that you create whilst your eyes are acclimatizing. And it's almost like you get used to sort of moving in the dark as well, and then thinking in the dark. And I do think there's cachet, especially in the world Jung and shadow work, which is all the rage on social media right now. There is space for the exploration of that darkness, but I think you're right. It's in moderation, right? And I think that applies to most things in life.
Yeah, absolutely, and you know, absolutely. This is an almost a note to self, really. You know, that as I'm saying it, um, I guess the problem we have is in Western culture because it does tend to be quite iconoclastic, and that's healthy. Like we shouldn't take things on trust. We do need to be skeptical, but there does tend to be, you know, whenever we're faced with positivity or you know embrace the light, especially being British. Maybe the Americans don't have this quite so much, but there's always a tendency to think, nah, that's so pony. Embrace the light. You embrace the light, mate. You know what I mean? There is very much like that underlying cynicism. You know, take your bright shiny we can do this positivity and go and put it in some 80s pop song, why don't you? You know, and yeah, again, in moderation, that cynicism, that skepticism in the right dose is healthy, but it can become too much. And then you just, you know, you're just going to end up that guy that sneers at everyone over his pint or his coffee if you've sobered up. You have to be careful with that. Um, and that fascinates me, the too light, too dark concept, because on a recent show, you explore what does that mean to you, and you ask your guests, and you know what I thought? I thought to me it means life is just too bloody intense sometimes. You know, yeah, it can be too dark. Like this is grim. I've lost my job. I have mental health problems. I've got addiction problems. I'm maybe about to be homeless. That's obvious, right? Too dark. But it can also be, I don't know if you can relate this to this, but it can be too bright sometimes, right? Everything is going great. I've got a wonderful girlfriend or partner. I have a great job. I got a great circle of mates. I got a nice place to live. And again, this is where the British cynicism thing comes in. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. It's too late. Self-sabotage is rearing. I'm going to fuck this up. I'm going to lose it. And life is just too damn intense sometimes. And that's what the title of your show means to me. It's the whole gamut. It is both too light and too dark. And how do we moderate both without turning life into this very sort of bland experience where it's like, now I have perfect balance and it's all in moderation? Because that's not desirable either. I mean, unless you're some kind of hardcore Zen Buddhist, then but then you're supposed not to desire anything if you're one of those guys. So that's a whole other conversation. Um, so yeah, how much of each is enough, and what is the right balance or mixture? I think we all have to answer that individually for ourselves, and I think that's probably a life work for each and every one of us.
For sure. And it sort of drags me along to something else that we discussed around episode 3, which again was super impactful for listeners, and it's been shared amongst all sorts of different social networks, both kind of professionally, and I suppose out in the margins and amongst the sort of artist activist space as well, which is really interesting. And one thing that really jumped out at me was this idea of toxic positivity, and then the rejection of false hope, and almost like, is choosing no light sometimes healthier than chasing optimism that isn't real? That was the question that I got from that. Don't know how you feel about
Yeah.
it.
Well, I'll tell you something. I mean, yeah, what jumped out at me was, again, I think it was Dr. Grelia's anecdote about, oh, look at the lovely lampshades. Yeah, this poor woman had been, okay, she had mental health problems documented. It was official. And she'd been on, from what he said sounded like quite a lovely country estate that had been repurposed. Sorry, I don't know the proper technical jargon terms, but I don't want to say a shelter, but a facility for people like her that were experiencing mental health problems. And then it was sort of being presented to as a win, like now it's time for you to move on and reintegrate with normal, right thinking society. And we have a pokey little flat in God knows where lined up for you. And they're showing her into the new place. And she doesn't have a choice in this. I got that impression from what Dr. Corelli was saying. That was a decision made on her behalf. And she didn't want to go. She was in tears. She was like, "Well, you're taking me out of an area I've been an environment I've been really comfortable in. And yeah, I have made progress because I've been there. And now you want to shove me into a pokey little flat." And what was the person's response? Dismiss all that. Look at the lovely lampshade. And Leon, I know you have strong feelings about this, about, I'm going to call it false positive thinking. I don't believe in being positive just for the sake of it. And that kind of what another author, Terry Eagleton, he's a bit of a socialist author, disclaimer, but he referred to as America's tendency to be pathologically upbeat, to be pathological. And I thought, God, that, and the guy, he annoyed Martin Amis, not to speak ill of the dead. I've read Martin Amis's work, very much liked it, appreciated it. I don't know if you can ever like Martin Amis's work, but anyway, this guy, Terry Eagleton, yeah, exactly. He really ruffled feathers there. So I thought he must be doing something right, whether you agree with his politics or not. But that if he can take on one of the great luminaries of the time and provoke a reaction. But anyway, he really coined it, that pathological desire to be upbeat, the fixed shiny smile again. Yeah, we can do this, man. Yeah, sometimes it is good to have that, to sort of say, you know what, I don't truly know if this is going to work out or not, so why not give myself the benefit of the doubt and say, yeah, we're going to do this. But there are times like the example Grelier gave where it's not helpful. It is not helpful to say to someone, who's maybe about to be out on the streets, well, it could be worse. You could be in Gaza. Okay, yeah. Agreed that would probably be measurably worse. Is that gonna make the person feel better? Knowing that some poor other human being, many of them, are out there getting it even worse. And so you are now effectively kind of almost shaming them into feeling bad about their situation. Because that's what's implicit there is, don't you go feeling sorry for yourself. There's others out there have it even worse. Yeah, that really jumped out at me. Don't say that to a woman who's fragile, who's probably made a lot of good baby steps to get better. And then you'll, as a win, as a success story, as a positivity, you are funneling her against her will into a situation she clearly doesn't want to be in. And your answer is, well, look at the lovely lampshades. This is a step up for you. And I really think that 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 level of toxic positivity, when it's like that, I think it does more harm than good. I think the ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, that actually seems to be more on the right track. Because sometimes you have to actually, yeah, this situation is pretty dicey. You did make a mistake. You did make some poor decisions. Now you gotta sit with that and be okay with the negative feelings that conjures up. And once you've got used to it, that's where sitting in the darkness in doses, in the right doses, can be salutary. And then you move towards the light. Don't just shine a big torchlight on it and go, there you go. So yeah, I really have a problem with that. And I know you do, Leon, because when I first met you and we were going through some
things,
some stuff, right? Trying not to swear. We were going through we were in a challenging predicament. I think you zeroed in on that with more alacrity than I did at the time. You were really like, no, Dame, I will not have this relentless positive thinking because I refuse. You were in a custody battle for the kids. You just got off some pretty toxic substances. You were up against it, and that's what drew me to you. One of many things. You're like, yeah, this guy is not going to sugarcoat it just for the sake of making the bitter pill easier to swallow. And I think that's really important that we have to bear that in mind. Is life is not always great. And there should be no shame in saying, I am not happy with this situation. I do not find this acceptable. I am sitting here telling you that my glass right now is half empty
Yeah.
or three-quarters empty, even. And we shouldn't silence that, in my opinion. It's important to acknowledge that and recognize that, because that's the stuff of life.
Yes. And just thinking about your earlier talking point and that sort of intersection where we're looking at ourselves, but then we're also looking about things that we've been through. And I thought about my own proclivity towards comfort and darkness. And then I thought about the sort of addictive side of my nature as well, and getting stuck there, because like for me, essentially protected me from expectation. It protected me from responsibility. And the big one, and I think this is why I was so anti-toxic positivity. I think there's merits to that, but maybe I've softened a little bit, because really when you first met me, I was trying to fight against expectation, responsibility, and then underpinning it all was the reluctance to change. I was quite happy smoking smack every day. Thank you very much. And it wasn't until there was real time consequences that there was like the manifestation of change. Just to be clear about that.
Yeah, just to be super clear, when I met you, I think you had been off the devil's substance for a while, but yeah, you had just knocked that on the head. And for me, my journey was with alcohol, I suppose. I mean, I dabbled in the other stuff. Never just disclaimer for the benefit of the listeners. I can't speak to heroin or crack.
Thankfully. Hooray.
Well, but alcohol, I tell you what, maybe you have to put a bit more effort into it, but it can take you to that same place eventually. You have to work at it bloody hard. But and it's funny because I remember when I was this maybe slightly off piece, but adjacent. Hope you'll excuse me. But when I was younger, I, I wasn't like you in the sense I was like, okay, I was curious. I was curious, and I was like, no, as I saw it in my stupid, naive teenage brain, I guess I didn't have the bottle. I didn't have the bottle to go straight for the hardcore stuff. So I was like, well, what can I do? Because I kind of want to escape this world as I saw it. It's bleak. It's not much fun. I just want to get out of it. I want to get. I wanted to quote the great Samuel Johnson. I want to send myself away. So I did what Samuel Johnson did. I drank. I drank to send myself away. And I found that actually, if you consumed alcohol with the right frequency and the right quantities, it did that job pretty well. Thank you very much. So that essentially became my drug of choice. And I'll say one thing is for sure, I think I never had that illusion that oh, it's because it's legal and you drink it and it tastes nice, it's not a drug. No, I was like, this is a mind altering drug. This is my mind altering drug of choice. Um, and I got away with it for back end of my teens, all of my 20s, into my 30s. Then I guess it becomes that's when I have girlfriends who start to say, Damien, I'm really worried about your drinking. I'm like, well, what do you mean? I only had 4 or 5 beers last night. That was a light night. And she's like, no, that's a heavy night to most normal middle class people that are putting a career together like you're supposed to be doing. And it's not your light nights I'm worried about. It's your not light nights when you do double or triple that, right? And it is incremental as a habit, I suppose. And over time, this is where it defaults to the classic story. It just got the best of me. And was I unconsciously or otherwise self-medicating, just sending myself away, yet not wanting to sit in the dark at all? Yeah, I guess I have to own up to that. I was there in the bar chasing the bright lights, sometimes chasing the girls with varying to limited degrees of success, chasing the bottle, really, chasing the great escape. And that's where it is very much the classic story of the alcoholic. But it was it was a slow burn incremental thing. I think if you looked at me at 21, 22, you'd have said, well, he's just kind of doing what everyone was doing. It was the 1990s, man. And like you, I was a bit of a musician. We all like the guitar. We all take over the world, take over the world. It's easy to talk it when you're on the wrong end of 7 or 8 points. But it was fun. To your original, it was fun. It was fun sending all that dark stuff away and only dealing with it through the filter of a hangover. Well, I feel like shit because I'm hungover. It's just the alcohol. I'll just either drink myself out of that or just do the hard yards because I got to work. I was a high functioning alcoholic and I'll be all right. And I wasn't really having that honest dialogue with myself. Now, Damien, there is some dark stuff that is underpinning all of that. And yeah, you maybe don't want to get lost in it and you don't want to be obsessed with it. But going back to what I was saying at the beginning of the show, you do actually need to relearn how to sit there for a while at least. And that's been my, to use a bit of a cliche, my journey over the last 5 or 10 years is relearning how to have those dark moments in self-imposed solitary without going into addiction again, and it becomes your new addictive identity. I mean, I don't know if you notice this in recovery circles. Some people become addicted to meetings, don't they? They
Yeah,
go to AA meeting and they can't go abroad without knowing for sure they can get to an AA meeting. And then I would go to these things, and some people say, "Well, Damien, you got to understand, this is just like the pub without the alcohol." And I thought straight away, there's something wrong there. You're going wrong there. I'm not saying I have all the answers. I'm here precisely because I don't. But there's something wrong there. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been my latest bout of sobriety. I'm coming up to a year. There are still times when I miss it. Yeah, when I just say fuck having that responsibility. Excuse my language. To hell with all that. I am just going to have that counterfeit version of the darkness where yeah, it's terribly dark. I'm sitting there topping up on beer or whiskey or whatever, but there's a layer
yeah,
between me and that darkness. And yeah, but to hell with the responsibility. To hell with being sober and trying to figure all this out. Let's just drink it all the way. Yeah, absolutely. I think there'll always be a little part of me that misses that. I can't deny that in all reasonableness. Um, but yeah, I mean, but with you, it was a different journey, right? Because you've told me, we've known each other for a long time now, Leanne, and you've said, with the heroin, it was so destructive that it kind of
yeah,
brought you to that point where it was like, okay, you either go left or you go right. And it's
yeah,
going to be as stark as that. And my journey with alcohol, it's never been quite that clear cut. It's like left, possibly it will take you to the bad place. Right, you might just about get away. I'm only speaking for myself. I know other people, their journey with alcohol is much starker than that. But with me, it's always been a little bit of a gray area, and that's where I have to be careful because then I can end up thinking, well, maybe I can still take that middle route, and I'm not so convinced I can anymore. But it seems less clear cut, if that makes sense.
yeah. And for me, it comes down to the clash. It was death or glory for me. That's what it was. And thankfully, I chose the right turning when I needed to. And I was thinking about what we choose, and then what's performative. What is it to be a man? And I've been thinking about this really clearly, and this ties into
Great topic.
to I suppose podcasts that I was actually quite nervous to put out, and there's a reason for that, and I'll come to that, and I've shared it already. But yeah, I think episode 8 with Ben Neal was the first time I really explored that masculinity piece and the vulnerability and how that sort of ties into leadership and being a good parent and I suppose just being a better person generally. But then, yeah, how much of that is performative? How much of that is learned? Where do your primary caregivers come into that? How much of that do you sort of push aside during your teens and through your 20s? And then do you finally become a man at 32 or 35? Or is everything just an individual case by case basis? So, yeah, like for you, what is masculinity? Is it performative? Is it intentional? or is it a mishmash of both?
Yeah, I mean, again, another great question, and one that I feel is not easily answered. Yeah, I mean, I was really intrigued by what you said about, and you just dropped it in there towards the end of that podcast with Ben to masculinity. It is performative. And I was like, okay, what does he mean by that? It's perform like, okay, we're all striking a pose. So these ideas we've inherited of masculinity, they're quite post-Victorian, which was a reaction to all of that, where they thought actually that's what had lost them the colonies when America broke away in Declaration of Independence. Oh no, we've been far too effeminate, and I mean it's bonkers, right? What on earth did young men dressing up or not in Covent Garden have to do with losing 13 territories, thousands of miles away? But this was the current of thinking. Well, that's the version I learned. So we've inherited these ideas about masculinity. I think it's largely post-Victorian, where stiff upper lip, short back and sides, dress a certain way, dress conservatively. I mean, Jordan Peterson, he's big on that, isn't he? Don't dress in a tracksuit, you loser. Um, dress up, dress up with respect. Show, project respect. It's a narrative. It's one way of looking at it, I suppose, of how to project power and masculinity. But really, we live in a pluralistic environment now, and people do not all have the same opinions and views of masculinity or femininity. And so you ask me what it means to be a man, I would say that's the wrong question to be asking. I think what you should be asking is, what does it mean to be Homo sapien? What does it mean to be a human being? And that's where you should start. That's where you should start. I have my five senses. Possibly I have a sixth sense, which is not to name drop the work, but that's a recurring theme throughout my fiction. You have the body that processes those. You have the brain. It's a dialectic. The brain feeds the senses, which feed back out to the world. The world feeds back in. That informs who I am. And I think that's really where you need to begin. And that's complex. That I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I have a perfect blueprint for what it means to be an existential being. I do not, but that is where you should start. And to me, starting with what it means to be a man or a woman or gay or straight or black or white or whatever, that I think is starting too small. I think you need to start from the bigger picture first. I'm not saying the other categories are not valid. Of course they are. We have these definitions, but I do not think that's a good place to start. I think you need to start, first of all, on the basic. What does it mean to be a human being? And then start to look at the other stuff, those categories, how we use those categories through the medium of language, which feeds back into thought and vice versa, to kind of populate our interior life and by extension, the world around us, which, as I say, then feeds back into us. And that's where you have to begin. But yeah, and that's really how I view it. I mean, okay, I'm a man. I don't know what does that mean? Is it how much money I earn? Is it I'm heterosexual? Is it how many women I've slept with? Is it the kind of jobs I've had? Is it how many fights I've been in? Is it how many fights I've won? Is it the opposite of all that? I mean, is it how many fights I've avoided? Is it how many times I could have maybe seduce someone and chose not to do that? You see, it's endless. You can put so many spins on that, and I just think it almost becomes a kind of pointless question. What does it mean to be a man? No, what does it mean to be a human? That's the question we should be asking ourselves.
Hmm. Great point. And there's like a segue here as well, and the segue is around kind of that hero complex and the hero archetype. And I think in a certain sense, Dame, I'm guilty of having walked into somebody's life and pretended I could change it through a whole series of different interventions and professional interventions. And there's a little bit of shame in me for that, Dame. And I wonder, have you ever worked with people, or have you ever sort of sat beside somebody who've got like, or have tried to change you as a person, or have got a complex that maybe they're kind of superior and they can give off certain advice, Dame? What's your thoughts on that?
Tell you this, I mean, I don't think the altruism runs quite I mean, I do have it, and I take exception to anyone who, decries altruism in toto. Absolutely, there is some altruism in society. Otherwise, we wouldn't have society if people
Mm.
didn't occasionally self-sacrifice. So I don't think you should feel guilty. I think that's very laudable that you did that and even thought you could do that. But I guess in my example from my life was I was a journalist for many years. I still am, in a manner of speaking. And I guess for a while there was that thought when I was younger, my 20s, even into my 30s, it's like you become not so much the gatekeeper, but the window keeper. Like I'm a journalist. This is before social media really got into its stride and changed everything. It was about us, the press, the journalists, the people have the right to know. We are the cornerstone of democracy. We are, again, talk about the dark. We are shining the light in that darkness. We are giving you, Leon Eckford, and everyone else that reads our paper or our website, and as it was going digital, the information you need to make informed decisions about your world. Now you can see where that can start to go wrong. Already you can see. So I'm not the gatekeeper as such to the prison cell or whatever. I'm the window keeper. Me. I am the one that is informing you for your own good. And let me tell you, I don't think people are going to disagree with all sorts of things I've said on this, I'm sure. But I don't think anyone that's worked in the industry in journalism would disagree with me when I say journalists are the most cynical and often self-seeking bunch of people you could ever hope to meet. I mean, if you said, Damien, put together a crack team of people who are going to save the planet, I don't think I'd want one of them to be a journalist. They are just not. They are not the nicest, most humane, and I have to include myself in that. They are not the nicest, most pleasant, humane bunch of people in the world. Are they essential? We got on without newspapers tolerably well for a few thousand years. Now it seems totally compromised because of the social media thing.
Mm.
I don't know, Lee, I don't think you should ever feel guilty for trying to do right by your fellow human being, but you're right to be alert to the pitfalls. And, you might at some point, if instead of being like what you talked about in one of the podcasts, the agent for change, you become the gatekeeper. Like, I can give you the pills or not today. And it depends on how well you behave. That's a very crude example, but yeah, there's that danger. And like in my profession, there was that danger of like, well, we're a bit special because we we enable you to think and be informed. Yeah, there's always going to be a power play around that, and you don't have to be Nurse Ratchet or or Howard Hughes to be. I can't believe I mentioned those two in the same breath. Probably really unfair to Howard Hughes, but poor analogies, and I call myself a writer. But you don't have to be that extreme. Or maybe Rupert Murdoch would be the better in that. You don't have to go to that extreme to see that there are pitfalls and humility. There's always humility. Like, the way I like to put it with journalism, if I need to bring a journalist back down to earth, including this one, we're just glorified town criers. Yeah, like the old guys in the middle went with the bell, hear ye, hear ye. Today the Lord announces a feast, or the church is giving alms on a Sunday. We're just town criers. It's not that special. And I think there is a lot of vanity in that profession. And maybe there is, I don't know, did you find that in yours, that there were people who were like, yeah, I'm the shit, I'm the savior of the people here, helping the poor, addicted and afflicted?
It's not as blatant as that.
It's not in journalism either. It's more of an undercurrent.
It's definitely a feeling, and why I was so angry at myself for it. So one, I was a rookie working in psychiatric care. And then two, I was clinging on to the organizational framework because I was petrified the job that I was doing, working night shifts in psychiatric care. But then the third bit, it was the first sober realization. And I was like, oh shit, you've become the authority figure that you've rallied against since you were about 14 years old. And it didn't hit me straight away. I was just like, oh no, 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 bro. I was gutted, man. It was probably a sharper lesson than any rehab lesson or any, psychologically informed intervention. It was like one of them real sober moments where, like everything coalesces, the dots join, the stars align. You think, oh mate, I need to switch up my game and I need to do it now.
But that's interesting because are you sure? Because the way you describe it, it's like you kind of had a flashback and 14-year-old Leon kind of reasserted himself briefly and said, "Hey, this is a guy I don't like." But are you sure 14-year-old Leon was absolutely correct? Because maybe sometimes you do need to step in and make an authoritative decision. If it's either this or the person self-harms, and maybe sometimes a journalist has to be kind of horrible and make hard decisions because otherwise maybe the story doesn't go out and then the
Yeah.
people don't get, and maybe they do need that information and they do have a right to know it. So again, it's one of those poses that has no easy answer. I mean, because what you could do is just, okay, never get involved. And I had a passage again in one of my books, if you'll excuse me, where I do say, you could be a man like the blacksmith brother to the protagonist who never leaves his town. He's a bit part character in the saga, and he'll never hurt anyone, not knowingly, and he'll never change anything. And then you've got his brother, his younger brother, who's the protagonist, and he goes out into the world with good intentions. He wants to help the world, you know, fight against the evil spirits and all that fantasy tropey stuff. And he ends up in the biggest adventure of his life, bigger than he could ever have expected. And he ends up making decisions that will get people killed. I am not portraying this guy as, he's not a bad actor at all. He is probably my most humane character, but even he, once you are in, are you going to get in the fight and get some blood on your hands, get your hands dirty, or are you going to wash your hands of it entirely and say, well, I'm not getting involved in this at all. Okay, you can do that. You can be, you can try. I would argue life will have its own ideas there. You can try and be Mr. Neutral and just not get involved. But or are you going to take a risk? And I don't know, Leon, from where I'm sitting, I think you did the right thing. Of course, you will have made mistakes. You will have made a decision at some point that maybe occasionally did more harm than good. Yet you might perforce have become that gatekeepery guy that the 14-year-old guy really didn't want to be. But what was the other choice? You carry on just abjuring all responsibility and not getting involved in the fight and not taking the risk at all. What? So you can say, well, I kept my nose clean and I minded my own business. You see, from where I'm sitting, that just doesn't sound terribly sexy. Excuse the expression.
No.
It really doesn't, does it? And yet there are many people who live their lives like that. I respect that up to a point. But no, I don't think you should ever feel guilty for that. Always be aware of where you made the mistakes and try and learn from them. Yeah, you were taking a job in it was a aftercare for people, right?
Yeah, it was predominantly section 2 and sections 3
Okay.
of the Mental Health Act. So it was hardcore, people still heavily medicated, but yeah, for a rookie to be thrown in there, I think I'd been off SCAG and associated medications maybe 5 months.
Hardcore. I mean that is, if I can drop into some vernacular, that is hard. That is bloody hardcore, mate.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, maybe you took up the good fight a little too soon, but hey, you got through it, and I think you've probably done more good than you have harm, and that's really important. But yeah, that is hardcore. Like, not half a year off what you yourself have told me is the most addictive and harmful substance, or one of them, known to man. You are hardcore, my friend. I mean, I'm glad it didn't backfire, and it could have sent you off the road. I mean, I wouldn't have had the strength to do that. 5 months in,
Um,
no way. It's improbable. Keep learning from the mistakes.
I'm just glad I had the awareness to self-reflect and do the things really that the supervisor should have been doing, and test your method, test your delivery and your tone, and why you're saying what you're saying. And I think that these are really important, especially when you're working in a helping capacity, and just to direct us, I suppose, into the reason why you're here today co-hosting and guesting on our 2025 review. I wanted to land today on storytelling, obviously, because you're an author, right? But the one thing that this podcast was probably birthed into was in the spirit of storytelling. And we've looked at that through a sort of classic and academic filter in episode 13. We've looked at through it in terms of people with lived experience sharing their story. We've shared some car crash examples of that and some really good ones at the same time. And I wonder, just to touch upon it as an author, how important is storytelling been to you in your life? Because as somebody specially placed to answer this, I think it's important that you share that.
Yeah. Do you know, I feel like I should be saying I've always been aware that storytelling is essential, but I think it really only came into sharper focus for me in the last 10, 20 years. So the second half, roughly, of my life, storytelling is everything. And you and I, we used to, narrative, narrative, narrative. You remember that when we first met? We talked. It's all about narrative. All about the narrative. I mean, and it was a word that we bandied back and forth a lot. And because I think we both were at that point in our lives where we were realizing just how important it was. And for me, storytelling is, even though it's what I've chosen to do, storytelling is absolutely not just something that happens in a book or a movie or a TV show or a poem. Storytelling is culture. Storytelling is identity. Storytelling is everything. And going back to the thing about why I said start with being a human being first. And then on top of that, that is the grand story. That is the central plot, if you like. I exist. And then you've got all of these subplots that weave around that. What's my class? What's my nationality? What's my ethnicity? My sexuality? Anything you could care to name. And we are composites of stories that are flowing and intersecting and diverging and evolving all of the time. And I feel that cannot be stated enough for me. It is, I don't know what point it fully dawned on me. It went from just being, yeah, I'd really like to tell some stories one day and, maybe write a book, and to, no, I'm living a story every single day, whether I like it or not, whether I enjoy the story or not, whether it could be a boring story today, or it could be a thrilling. Yeah, I'm off on a trip for 2.5 weeks, and it's going to be exciting. Every day is a goddamn story. It is a story, and you don't always get full agency of writing it. Again, it goes back to don't be false positive thinking. You don't always have control of the narrative, but absolutely, politics is the attempt to take control of the narrative, is to dictate the story. History is precisely that, his story. Notice the masculine specific construction of the word. Everything is narrative, everything is a story. And that doesn't mean it's just fiction. Like, yes, when I put out a book, that is presented as a work of fiction, but hopefully people, and I think judging by the quotes you put my way back at me, which I didn't know existed, by the way, before today, people are realizing that as well. Again, there are stories within stories, and the story is always there, whether I put any of it down into a book or not. Look, you're an example, and you mentioned this in 2 separate podcasts, is, going back to do you go left, do you go right? My story didn't have that, as I was saying before, but you had that. And what did that key worker do? She sat you down. She told you a story, Leon. She said, Leon, this is like, welcome to your own, choose your own adventure. Leon Eckford, you can take the left corridor or the right corridor. You can go down the trap door, or you can open the chest that's in the corner. One of these is not going to have a good ending. One of these is Leon, you're going to fall foul of this, and it's not going to be pretty. You're going to come to sticky end. And she told you a story, and that resonated. And I know that resonated with you because you've mentioned that twice on 2 separate podcasts that I've listened to, and you've mentioned that to me on numerous occasions. That key worker is a plot point in your story. And it was a she, I believe. She always will be. She will always be a major plot point, not a subplot point, a major plot point in your life. because that's how you've cast it. You've cast it thus, and that doesn't invalidate it. That absolutely the opposite. That validates it, and that was a turning point in your life. She told you a story, and it was a simple story. It didn't have to be Shakespeare. It didn't have to be Tolstoy. It was like, Leon, broadly, you've got two options. Carry on as you are, and you're either going to go to jail or end up in um,
Down there.
down there. You're going to end up in one of those places. Prison
Down there.
institution was a great. You're in there, mate. Right down there. Or you can take the other option. You can open the door, walk through it, and see what happens.
Yeah.
It's a story, and that I know that had a potent effect on you because you've mentioned that so many times, and you've gone back, and that part of the story never wavers. It's always, I was there, I was coming off, I was rattling, I was in all kinds of messiness, trying not to swear again, and I was like, what do I do? And she just laid it out for you. Storytelling. I mean, it's so potent. I cannot stress it enough. And yeah, I would say that I'm an author and what have you, but I mean, we are all authors in a way. I know that sounds incredibly hokey, but we are authors in a way. And I think for those that believe in God, I personally don't, but I think one of the ways they used to describe God was the author of all.
Yeah.
God's telling the story, right? If that's your thing, if that's what you believe, somebody has told the story. For the Aboriginals, it was they brought the world into being through song. They sang the world into life. Everyone is a storyteller. And you do have some agency over that, over how you tell your story, both how you present it to yourself and to others. But it doesn't always have to be relentless positive thinking again. Because again, no one wants to read that story where they had no challenges, it was all hunky dory, and they all lived happily ever after. No one wants to read stories like that, do they? I'm not sure I do. You know, we want the blood, sweat, and tears, the trials and tribulations. So again, to sort of pivot a bit back to the light and dark theme at the beginning of the podcast, and this is a note to self again, we need to embrace that darkness, not too much, but yeah, maybe I'm having a crappy day today. And actually, that's what I'd want to see if I was reading the story about another person. I don't want
Yeah.
to know that he had a great restaurant and had fab sex with a wonderful person and got a pay rise. I don't want to know that. I want to know he went in and he lost his job and he came home and he found his partner in bed with someone else and trials and tribulations, right? We need to try, all of us, and be a bit more accepting of that. What we want for others, maybe we need to lean into for ourselves a bit more. That's maybe something we have to go away and, decide for ourselves. But stories, I cannot stress it enough, key to everything, if you ask me.
And yeah, going back to our original point about the lampshade in episode 3, that's lazy storytelling, in my opinion.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and when I think
Right on.
about personal stories, and I suppose how my story and my crafting my individual narrative is in some sense got me out of the shit real quick. I also see that in terms of best practice, and in the face of systems which often fail. So what I mean by that directly is that the people who are driving neurodiversity in prisons, for example, are the ones who are closest to the problem with active diagnosis, who've been fucked over by the system in a certain way. If you look at substance use and substance misuse and drug usage, the ones closest to the problem are the ones who can actually identify solutions. Now, obviously, it has to be regulated and there has to be work with these people, but it all comes to getting these people to actually tell their own story. And that's the best way to, in my opinion, enact change in communities that have felt disenfranchised or marginalized. Wonder how you feel.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, what really jumped out at me was episode podcast where the guy talked about how they'd mentally murdered him. And that
Yes.
just jumped out. It's like, yeah, and I could really relate to that. It's like I'm not being listened to. It's like, let me just have my narrative. If it sounds bonkers and crazy to you and wrong-headed and paranoid, Just let me get it out there. Let me tell my story. You don't have to like it. You don't have to believe in it. You don't have to agree with it, but let me tell it. And don't just shush it down. And I really felt for that guy. Okay, I don't think I've been through anything quite as bad. You know, he'd been sleeping rough. A man of color in the States. I can't speak to that. I don't know what that is like because I'm a white guy in Britain. It's like, just let the man tell his tale. Let him tell his story. Don't just box ticket and then say, well, clearly by by the yardstick measured out by all right thinking members of society, you are clearly mad. You are, we are not going to give credence to that. Yeah, they mentally murdered him, and that's, yeah, short of actually killing them, I suppose that's about the worst thing you can do to somebody. So yeah, absolutely, let the people who, as we used to say in recovery, have walked the walk. Let them talk the talk. It's really important. Having said that, I also listened to the episode about the Pavement magazine, and you
Mhm.
had two fellas on. I don't remember the name, and one of them who was the guy, shall we say, who had walked the walk, and he was with the guy who had maybe not gone down that road himself, but he did. He was at pains to compliment him and say, "You don't always have had to walk the walk to be really good at providing an empathic service that really lets people open up." So that is important as well. Yeah, I don't think we should go too far down that road. Just say, okay, if you haven't had some kind of trauma, you're not an alcoholic, you were never into drugs, you've never been sectioned. Yeah, well, then you're of no use to us now. Obviously, don't throw the baby out with the proverbial bathwater. There are people like this fellow who was on from the pavement who clearly know what they're about. But yeah, I really can't stand that where people are just not even just silence. It's like, no, tell us your story. Okay, now you've told it, we're just going to dismiss it, put it in a box, tie a ribbon around it, and then just give you a narrative that's completely unsuited for you and force you to live in it. A bit like that poor woman being forced to live in a flat. But I don't want to live in a pokey flat and wherever it was. I actually quite like being on, you know, in the converted country estate. And we can't just keep doing that, trying to force people. How is that going to work for people? I don't think we can. So we need to keep listening to people. And yeah, even people that have stories that maybe a lot of people would consider by their standards a bit crazy or whatever, you've got to let them have the story. Um, Otherwise, then yeah, then where does it leave us? You know, you're just trying to make people conform to a standard, a norm, and who sets the norm? You know, and we live in a pluralistic, multicultural society, multi-religious plus atheism. How is that going to work in today's society? I don't see how you can take that, if indeed it ever did. I don't see how now more than ever can you take a one size fits all off the shelf. And there you go. If Sir would like to try that on, that is Sir's new narrative. I don't know about you, Leon, but I don't see that ever working.
No. And here's a landing spot. I feel like Nadia Comaneci or Olga Korbut about to land an ending here. But here's my positive spin is that if outcomes follow the stories people believe about themselves, I think that there's consequence of what happens when no one offers an alternative future, right? So, and what I mean by that directly is that if one-on-one basis, the next person I meet, even if it's a fleeting interaction, I'm going to do my best to try and, I suppose, try and empower and uplift. And I think the most important one is be kind, because what Jake from the Pavement is a guy you're referencing, what the female guest from the Canadian harm reduction unit in Canada had, what the lovely doctor who spoke to us about codependency had, what all these people had, lived experience, non-lived experience, is compassion. And in a certain sense, radical compassion, if you will. So
I
willing to
like
go
that.
beyond the sort of the classical
Radical compassion.
compassion itself. And I think that that's what I would like to be an arbiter of moving forward.
I like that. Radical compassion. You see, I love it when I hear two words that I haven't heard put together. I like that. I mean, I used to work with a guy who talked about radical centrism in politics. I was like, yeah, that sounds like an oxymoron. But radical compassion, yeah, that I can get with. Because that is so important, to be kind, but not kind just for the sake of there. Like compassion, I don't want to go down that road of cruel only to be kind, because that's a bit dated, a bit old school. Maybe we still need some of that occasionally, but I'd caveat that quite heavily. Um, yeah, again, I think going back to, we talked about false positive thinking, being aware of, because there can be false compassion as well. Like I suppose the lampshade story would fit into that a bit. Like, oh, I was just trying to cheer her up by pointing out the lamp. No, you just couldn't be bothered to deal with it, and you just said the first thing that came off the top of your head. It was lazy, like lazy storytelling. So yeah, I think that's really laudable. What you're saying is you want to go forward and show compassion, but radical in the sense of, I don't just want to be the person that's like there, and I don't want to go to being the person of the school of hard knocks. No, I want to be kind, but kindness with a constructive purpose. Like kindness I can show to somebody that is hopefully going to help them further along. And I have to say, I do agree with what I think it was Ben Neal said in podcast number 8 on masculinity. And he said the pendulum, it does seem to have swung towards, I know it's become a bit of a buzz term, toxic masculinity, and the cynics on the right, oh, that's just more woke politics. Well, I think, to be fair, that okay, maybe even taking the masculinity out, because there's toxic femininity too, I would argue. I think generally compassion seems to be, we're losing it. And you know what I think? I think if you find most people they feel alienated from their daily jobs, they certainly feel alienated from the fruits of their labor because they're not really getting much. They can't afford to pay rent, they can't afford to pay bills, never mind have a holiday, save for a mortgage, take up a hobby. They're not going to have a lot of compassion. It's going to be pretty thin on the ground. I mean, I remember doing the whole backpacker thing, and okay, how privileged I was to be able to do that. And I went to India for 4 months. There's not a lot of room for compassion and this was back in the 90s. I'm told it's moved on a lot since then, so my knowledge is dated. But as I saw it then, not a lot of room for compassion when you had 1 billion plus people teeming and all of them are fighting to get across. There's no room for it. And if we're not being served socioeconomically by the present political system, and I, for one, absolutely don't think we are, compassion is going to be the first casualty, radical or otherwise. People aren't going to have room for it, and they will be more easily swayed by a triggering narrative that is almost like a kind of perversion of feel good. Well, just single out a group of people, low hanging fruit, and blame it all on them. Well, I can see how far that gets you. But people fall for it, and they lose. That's what happens to us when we lose the compassion, because it's based on imagination as well. It's put yourself in the other person's shoes. Even the old Christian trope, do unto others as you would have done unto you. Take a leap of imagination. How did any political revolution, whether it was softly, gradual reform or radical revolution, it all happened in the imagination, right? It dared to imagine on the grand scale, in the grand scheme of things, but also on the personal level, with the person right in front of you. How would they feel? And that, when that becomes a casualty of a failing, a morally and increasingly financially bankrupt socioeconomic system, and that is the first casualty, then we're headed for trouble. Because that is where we're in the risk of life becoming, when you lose the compassion, then we're becoming brutes. We're becoming more brutish versions of ourselves, and we lose the ability to imagine a better world. We stop doing it. And then it's back to dog eat dog world. Nothing is going to change for the better. I really think that is a problem. A failing socioeconomic system that is engendering a chronic and continuing erosion of compassion. That does not look like a good combination to me. That really, I have to say, doesn't fill me with optimism for the future. And I would say, again, you need to start from the bottom up, and you need to address that socioeconomic system. But it's almost like the toxic gift that keeps giving, because the more that system undermines our compassion, the more, I suppose, self-centered we become, and the less able to imagine what other people, what life might be like for them, and then the less likely we are to come together and try to do something about it. And that is a downward spiral that keeps me up at night. I won't lie, that keeps me up at night most nights now. And that's one thing. Don't you miss that, Leon? When you didn't stay up at night worrying about that stuff because we were in the throes of addiction. It was a bit easier then, wasn't it? In that sense, and that's what it is to be. I suppose that's what they mean when they talk about being a grown up. Is you're thinking about this stuff because you're sober most nights, and that's what adults have to worry about. And we ask ourselves these questions, and we don't have ready answers for them, but I really hope we can arrive at one. I really hope, but as I say, that feels like a downward spiral we're in, and I don't know. I can ask the question, Leon, but I'd be a liar if I said I had the answer. I don't know how we break that cycle. Not yet, anyway.
I suppose to land the point, it gives me another reason why this podcast exists, is to continue to push that kindness and that narrative, and suppose the direction of the podcast, whilst also willing to rummage around in the dark with a little bit care as well.
Absolutely.
And just sort of drilling into you and your work at the minute. First of all, let me thank you for your time today.
Thank you for yours. Oh,
We've
absolutely.
bounced all around, and I think it's important for you to share with our listeners, where can they find your books and where can they touch base with you online, just so people can follow up after this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, we are currently owned by the technocracy, so it will be Amazon. I am available in digital format, that is Kindle, and also via the Kindle Lending Library for anyone listening that does belong to the Lending Library. So on both those formats on Amazon, you can also order good old-fashioned print copies from Amazon again, or via Barnes and Noble. And also for those of you that like audiobooks, the first 3 books of the Broken Stone Chronicle are available in audiobook format. And you can either get that on Audible or you can get that again on Amazon. And yeah, feel free to check out my work if it takes your fancy. Thank you very much.
And I was thinking about 2025. I was thinking about Artemis and NASA's project for the moon. I was thinking about AI writing novels. I've seen Avatar, New Horizons, the rehashing of that. Billie Eilish topping the charts. I thought about climate goals, staying suppose centered on carbon neutrality by 2050. Paris hosting big sporting moments. The highs and lows. Interestingly, memoirs surged in book sales as well. Top of
Really?
the
You know that?
yeah, top of the best-selling charts. AI memes flooded feeds, and I think I've flooded some people with them as well.
That
Um,
doesn't surprise me, that one, yeah.
and then also we've had the sort of classic war and pestilence and socio-political back and forth, and then I suppose it's been a year of extremes. But then, like, what year isn't full of extremes, right?
Yeah, isn't it? Like, I remember having a conversation with a guy at work years ago, and I said, "Oh, yeah, I was just getting into my stride, thinking about getting into journalism, early 20s. This is wrong with the world. That's wrong. And it's not like it was 20 years ago." And he just said he was a clerk of the court. So he was, the guy that just listens to it, writes it all down. And don't you think that in the 1930s, there were people having this exact same conversation? And it always stuck with me. Damn it. You had me banged to rights. I bet you there were people in the 30s, hey, it just wasn't, it's not, we didn't have these problems in the early 1900s. Yeah, they're always saying it in the 90s. And now here we are in 2025 saying about, oh God, Leon, wasn't it so much easier in the 90s? Yeah, the world will always be, I think Hanif Qureshi, the author, who said, he was talking about his own life. Like, don't you find it's easier being 50 now, and you don't, you don't have the folly of youth? He goes, yeah, but I've got all sorts of problems related to middle age to worry about. And then the quote they left him on was, being alive always has been and always will be an incredibly difficult thing to do. I hope I'm not misattributing that. I think it was Hanif Qureshi said that. Uh, couldn't say it better myself. That's why I'm not Anif Qureshi, assuming it was him that actually said it. It always will be fraught. I mean, in terms of things that specifically relate AI, but then again, we worried about people worried about television. It would turn us all into zombies, right? And now it's social media. People worried about the train when the train was invented. It's ruining our great English countryside, and it's the beginning of the end. Is it really? I mean, I interviewed a guy who runs an AI company a couple of years ago, and he just said, "Okay, let's just throw all this stuff out about AI taking over the world. Not going to happen until AI learns how to have an instinct, the way he put it, an instinctive fear of heights and loud noises, which we're all born with, because that's hardwired into us by evolution." He said, "Forget about sentient AI." That was his take. But AI putting lots of people out of work, yeah, that is a distinct possibility. I'd recommend Blood in the Machine. It's not one of my books, but I had to review it. I should remember the author, but it was a few years ago. And he talks about the so-called Luddite movement and the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and how that put so many people out of work and brought it was the unwitting father probably of the communist socialist movement, because it was the beginning of people being funneled into factories and just labor being completely degraded. So there is a very real risk that AI is going to do something similar. But you're right, Leon, it has always been a complex place. To paraphrase, I think, Qureshi, the world always has been and always will be a very difficult place in which to live.
Yeah, and for me, some years don't give any answers at all, and in some sense, it always feels that it's things can never get any worse and they can never get any better. They're right now. But one thing that I always like is they always fuel my curiosity and always leave me with more questions than when I started. So, with that curiosity, kindness, and love, we're going to push into the year ahead. I'd like to say on behalf of myself and Damien, season's greetings for 2025. Let's wave it goodbye peacefully. Six, let's welcome it in our open arms. Let's take it to our bosom, Damo, and rub its forehead and tell them that everything's going to be all right. That's been Too Light, Too Dark, the 2025 review. We'll see you in 2026. So stay gold, stay connected, stay beautiful, and remember to sit wet. Namaste. Thank you, mate.
Namaste, Leon. Thanks for having me.